All right, this is my first time using this program, so I'm going to hope that it works and I don't have to record it again. This is a look at the Maya or the Mayans. This is in chapter 6 of the 2018 version of the AMSCO for AP World History. I suggest that you go back and reread this chapter. It's not a particularly long chapter. The Mayans are mentioned in the key concept guide for AP World History, even though the time that they are around, it falls prior to the 1200, around the 1200 start date. It's still considered by AP testable material. And when you look at the chapter of chapter 6, and it's talking about early American civilizations, you go from the Moche to the Mesoamericans. It's looking at Teotihuacan, then you get into the Mayans. The chapter itself is only about 7 pages or 6 pages, so you definitely need to take time to read it and make sure that you're taking your own notes. So we are now moving from looking at things. We've looked at Asia, we looked at Africa, we've mentioned the Polynesian people, we've talked about Europe, we're going to include Russia in that. And so we're now finally going to move over and look at, well, what's going on in the Americas while you've got the Mongols ruling in China, or you've got the Renaissance going on in Europe finally, or you have trans-Saharan trade, or you've got the Indian Ocean trade bringing bananas to Swahili, or you've got Great Zimbabwe. What have the Americas been doing since we've kind of ignored them? So here's the point here's where we're going to look up that. The Mayans, this is a map just looking at the area where the Mayans had control, or where they had at one time lived. It's most of what's considered Central America. So you've got parts of Mexico, you have what is now Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Belize. That's all Mayan, what was Mayan territory. Right, so their classical period is from about 250 BC to about 950 AD. Again, we want to note that this is the pre-cutoff of the 1200 date that modern AP world is supposed to start at, but yet they're still included in the key concepts. So, or you can go to, and here you go, 10 AD to 1190 AD, and that's where they're getting that point from. All right, so the Mayas that we know, they were not actually called the Mayans. When the Spaniards arrived, the major city was Mayapan, and that's how they got the name Mayas. We don't really know what they were called. A lot of the information that we're going to have about societies from Mesoamerica, whether it be the Mayans or the Incas, or the Incas in South America, or the Aztecs, it's from Spanish explorers, and this is why when we look at history, point of view comes into play. And we've studied this before with lots of short answer questions asking, well, why is this person's point of view? How is that impacting the information that we're getting? So you need to keep in mind, particularly when we get to the Aztecs, that the point of view from some of these things are coming, our original points of view and our original data is coming from Spaniards who had a very kind of condescending point of view of what they were coming to. It's the only great civilization to technically be located in what's considered a jungle. It's primarily in the Yucatan Peninsula and North Central America, we just saw. And here is showing their kingdom again. You have the small map. I keep forgetting, you have the small map here, and then you have it showing you in the larger context if you are geographically in need. All right, so Bishop Diego de Landa is best known for 2 reasons. First, when he first goes to the Spaniards that have contact with the Mayans and they see the Mayan civilization that have been left, he's like, oh my God, these books are not Christian. They must be from the devil. Look at the things that are in them. Look at the images that they have. I don't understand these. These make me uncomfortable. And so he destroys them. And that's really rather unfortunate because those were primary sources that we didn't have access to because he destroyed them because he feared what was in them or found them offensive to his religious principles. However, he later on is like, wow, I made a big oopsie. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have destroyed those texts. And so he returns back to the Yucatan Peninsula and writes a book basically about his opinion of the people that are there. but we still don't have access to those texts. So that's why when people mention Bishop Diego de Landa, they talk about how he originally was destroyed the primary text and then says, oops, goes back and tries to do a study of them, and that study becomes pretty important. He bases his study based on 3 Mayan books that didn't get destroyed. So imagine what were in the other ones. That always makes me very curious. All right, so the Mayans developed in Mesoamerica around 1000 BC. At the height of their civilization, they had about 10 million people spread across 40 cities. So it was very populous, and they had functioning cities. Before the cities, they lived in villages, and so remember, just your city would have been a conglomeration or a meshing together of the villages to form a larger city. They were known for growing corn, beans, and squash. These are all things that are American foods that are native to America. The corn, a lot of times you're going to see written, here as, this is supposed to be maize that I'm trying to write. That's not even a Z. Maize. So when you see maize, you can also say corn. It's kind of technically not the same thing, but the same thing. Beans and squash. So all things they would not have had in Europe. They had a rainforest environment in the Yucatan Peninsula. So in order to farm, they used and employed what's called slash and burn agriculture. It's actually still used today in rainforest areas. It's not seen as being very environmentally friendly. What they do is they cut down the area that they want to farm, and then they burn it to the ground, and that's supposed to actually make the soil really nutrient rich. However, they often can't use the same field year after year after year, so they're constantly cutting down more rainforest. Today, that's the argument against slash and burn agriculture. I'm sure that the way they were using it when the Mayans were, it wasn't really a thing. They weren't worried about the environmental effect of it. Farmers that lived in the more mountainous areas used terrace farming, and that's where you go to the edge of the farm of a mountain, and you're kind of building your farms around it, almost like a circle as you're going up the mountain. Trade networks. So farming did not supply everything that they needed. You couldn't get everything from farming. So they traded. We know that they traded. We have evidence of trade. How do we know that? We know that they traded cotton. Jade, again, is that green stone. The trading helped support the larger populations because one village could, if you didn't have it in your village, then you could get it from another village. The evidence that supports trading is that we're able to find things that would have been specific for one geographic area. It would have only been native there. They would have only been able to get it there. But we have artifacts that show it hundreds of miles away. So we know that there's trading going on, and we see things, exchanges from both sides. So village A traded with village B, and we know that because of the archaeological evidence supporting that. But it's important to know that they're trading internally at this point. Most of the cities are built between 1250 AD and 900 AD, and that's referred to their classic period, almost sort of like the height of civilization where they are moving up to as far as they are going to advance that we know of. They all contain pyramids. That's really interesting because that's something that we see from Egyptian. And so you've got a archaeological, or you have an architectural style that develops independently of one another. The Egyptians and the Mayans did not know each other, yet they're building similar structures. And historically, we find that very fascinating when you've got a structure or a trend that develops in isolation of one another around the same time period, or of course, in this case, it's a little bit further off, but how did that happen? How did they come up with that knowledge? This is all to honor their gods. The economy is based on agriculture and trade. These are things the farmers are growing. Again, maize, corn, beans, squash, pumpkins, chili peppers, tomatoes. Again, all America's based food, things that Europe would not have had. And I'm pointing that out because we'll talk about the Columbian Exchange coming up, and that's sort of really important to like worldwide history. Farmers brought surplus crops to open markets, and then they traded their surplus. So just like you see in Europe where you have marketplaces, or in China where you have marketplaces, or any of the trade routes, because you have a surplus, you're able to trade it, you're able to get goods that you wouldn't have otherwise. Merchants traded throughout Mexico and Central America. How did they do it? We know that they used canoes to trade along rivers. The goods had to be carried by humans. Why? They did not employ the wheel, and they don't have large domesticated animals. So horses, those sort of things, those are all located in Europe. They're not native to Central and South America or to the Americas at all. So those large pack animals, they just don't have access to. So they're not able to use it. So humans are able to do it. They have wheels, but they're not using wheels for any practical purpose. We know that wheels, particularly with the Aztecs later on, we see them on children's toys, but they're not using wheels to help them with day-to-day life. So again, they're trading with themselves or within the Americas. The trade system existed through which salt, obsidian, which you may know from Minecraft, jade, cocoa, animal pelts, tropical bird feathers, luxury ceramics, and all other goods flowed. And you're trading from the highlands and the lowlands. And again, there's archaeological evidence of their trading. People either bartered for goods, or oftentimes they were changing them for cacao beans or cocoa beans. Chocolate, it was seen as really important and really rare, and chocolate is amazing. So this is just showing you commonly bartered items. If you barter, remember, I have this, will you give me that? Cities functions as city-states. So just like we talked about, and this has been an SAQ question in the past, in Italy, they had city-states, or in Greece, they had city-states. They functioned as themselves. They're not united. Each city had its own ruler, its own government, its own thing. No single ruler ever united all the cities. There's no central government for the Mayans at all. The cities are linked through trade, and then they're linked through warfare because they're often fighting each other. So again, like ancient Greece, or as we were just talking about in Italy in the Renaissance, or Italy in the Middle Ages, when they're not united, you have all these different little city-states, these little kingdoms, and those kingdoms all trade with each other. They also fight each other, but they're not united, but they're all Mayan. Kings. The Mayans believed that their kings communicated with the gods. Once again, this is how they're legitimizing their power. Notice there is a religious connection. I'm here because the God wants me to be here. They worshiped many gods, so they are polytheistic. They believed that in order to prevent bad things from happening and get good things to happen, they had to sacrifice to the gods. You got to keep the gods happy so that the gods will bless you with the rains you need for the crops. They will bless you with plentiful animals. They will keep your people safe. If not, then the gods are going to get you. They do believe in blood sacrifice, but not to the extent that the Aztecs do, and not to the extent of human sacrifice. Blood sacrifice was often seen through drops of blood, so you would do that through piercing, the piercing of the tongue. If you've ever had your tongue pierced, there is a significant amount of blood that does come with that, and those drops of blood would be part of the ritual in which they were making sacrifices to the god, or by piercing the skin. So body piercing, not just a modern day thing. Mayan religion, it's the center of their life. Just like when we've looked at pretty much every other civilization, religion is the center of their life. We haven't studied anyone that doesn't have a religion. Whether we're studying the Catholic Church in Europe and their control of everything, or you're looking at the Islam and the importance of Islam in so many areas, or you're looking at do we have Buddhism, or do we have Confucianism, or the Mongols have the sky god? Religion is super important. It's legitimizing the power of the ruler. It's uniting the people. It becomes a part of the culture. It is something people are willing to defend to the death. They believed in two levels of existence. You have your daily life in which you lived, and then there's your spiritual world, and that's where the gods, your ancestors, and other supernatural creatures lived. They believed that actions on level 1, so things you did in this life, could affect the spiritual world, and in a way, vice versa. So if the spiritual world needed to straight up intervene, they intervened. They do have ancestor veneration, so you saw that in Africa. We talked about it. We often talked about it in Asia as well. And they believed the two were really closely connected. It wasn't just kind of a thing, the spiritual realm. It was an important part of your daily life. The Mayan king is both a political and a spiritual leader, so they have a theocracy. That's just like you have in the Byzantine Empire. The king is both the head of the church and the head of the state. Again, the king was seen because he was so close to the gods that it was important that he would do the rituals, so that because he had the greatest connection. They have huge pyramids and temples where they built where thousands could gather for special religious ceremonies and festivals. These are just looking at the different pyramids and temples. So this is looking at a game that they play that we're going to see in other areas in Mesoamerica. It's called Pacatak, and it's a ball game, and it's played on a field that looks like this. And then the object of the game is to move a hard rubber ball without using your hands or your feet and get them through the hoop. The hoop, it's a stone hoop, and it's actually pretty high up. So there's a lot of debate. There's some things that said that at the end of the game, that one of the teams was sacrificed, but there's disagreement on whether it was the losers or were the winners. Were the winners sacrificed because it was such an honor to be given as a human sacrifice to the gods, or were the losers team sacrificed because they lost? It's really high stakes, really, really important stuff that you have going on with that. This is just showing you the hoop. Again, imagine, and here's somebody trying, showing you how it would be played. So it's kind of like soccer, but not like soccer, but whatever's, I couldn't have done it. This is, I cannot think of the word. It's an engraving, and it's showing you the decapitation scene at a ball court. People willingly did this because that was the role that you played. They have a social hierarchy, and you accepted your role. And I circled the wrong thing, so my bad, but it was back there. Okay. This is just showing you a ball court again. Astronomers. So they were really good at astronomy and science and math, particularly ahead of certainly the Europeans at the particular time. They calculated both lunar and solar festivals. They used this information of their eclipses. They used this to have festivals. So the lunar and solar eclipses were really important. They knew when they were occurred. They thought it was a sign from the gods. It was a big deal. They also had understood the solar positioning of the sky. They had mapped out the planets. Some people believe that in Teotihuacan, which is their big city, that the location of the temples, that those are all done to map out the solar system in pretty good, pretty accurate. There's also some theory that I had read that they were saying that the location of the major cities also had a connection to do with the mapping of the solar system. They had a 365-day farming calendar, but only a 260-day religious calendar. So like today, you have certain religions and they have their calendar, and then it kind of superimposes onto the calendar that we all follow. That's the case there as well. This is believed to be, it's a pretty famous engraving that was on in blah, blah, blah. It's from a Mayan society. I think it's from Teotihuacan. So some people believe that they were so advanced that they also had thought about human flight and how to move things. Some people say that this is actually a drawing. If you see the man right here and he's working gears, they believe that this is smoke all down here. The gears that he is working is actually a rocket ship. It's going up, and that there's a theory that they had at least thought about how to move from Earth to space. Certainly not suggesting that they had space travel, but that, like we looked at Leonardo da Vinci, who had thought about the flying machine, that the Mayans were also thinking about it as a way to come in contact with their gods. There's lots of discrepancy about this particular image, but you do see this one a lot to reference. Some say it as just someone who is looking up to the sky and trying to get. Hopefully it still goes and I have not messed up entirely. So it's trying to show you the social structure. They have a social hierarchy, so they meet the need for civilizations. The king is at the top. Remember, they are both king and head of the church. Then you have the priests, the warriors, the craftspeople, the common people, and then the slaves and servants. Slaves and servants were probably POWs from different wars. They had a mathematics system based on the number 20. They recognized zero, like the Romans didn't recognize zero, but they recognized zero. This is their counting system. They are one of the first Native American cultures to develop a writing system. Only within the past 25 years have we actually been able to figure out what the writing was. In fact, when I was growing up in school and I learned about the Mayans, we didn't know what their writing said. So we've since figured out, there isn't a Rosetta Stone or anything, what we've put together. It's a pictorial system, so it's kind of like hieroglyphics. They did a lot of recording. They recorded the genealogy of the kings and the royal families. They recorded mythology. They recorded their history. They recorded ritual practice, and they recorded trade. So they recorded a whole bunch about themselves. Of course, lots of it got destroyed. But the stuff that is on the buildings that has survived is still there. This is looking at some of the symbols and what we know the symbols mean. Teotihuacan, if you notice that this is the Yucatan Peninsula, and Teotihuacan is their huge city right out here. It's northeast of present-day Mexico City. They had about 200,000 people at its peak, so it's a massive city. The city was laid out on a grid. It was well planned. It was purposely planned. In excavations, we found more than 600 pyramids, 2,000 apartment compounds, workshops, huge marketplace. It was a massive city. I mean, not like New York City, but, you know, kind of half of Raleigh, bigger than Greenville, it was functioning. It was a happening place. Why do we point this out? Because it's showing that they were advanced. That when the Europeans get there and the Mayans are gone, but the Aztecs are there, and they want to talk about how these people are behind and they're heathens and they're not smart and they haven't done all this stuff. We're here to say that they did have advancement, that they did have things that met the needs of civilization. It may not have looked like the Europeans, but they were functioning. This is showing you the layout of Teotihuacan. Of course, this is from today because it has a parking lot, but you can see the different pyramids and how the pyramids are connected to the mapping out the solar system. This is just showing you again. Why did it collapse? We don't know. Was it political disunity? Did they just fight each other and kill each other off? Well, that's not possible because we know they're descendants. Was there a problem with agriculture? Did they have warfare so they couldn't focus on farming? Did they overfarm? Was there a drought? Was there malnutrition? We don't know. It probably was a combination of all of these factors.